So this is a very spontaneous video and I don't intend to make it too long, but I have just come across a video by Louis Theroux. He's a British investigative journalist. He's well known for covering more unusual topics, but the video I've just watched is a more, let's say, conventional topic. It's crime. And he was in inner city Philadelphia talking to some young men who were basically sort of explaining or on some level explaining the lifestyle that is there, about why snitching is bad, why crime happens. Actually, none of them had an answer to that. It was. I don't want to get into a really long, in-depth video about the psychology behind criminal behavior and all that. That would take a long time. But there is a common theme when I see this, and it isn't just in the United States. It's anywhere in the world, really, where you have these inner city blighted areas where there is a culture of really acceptance for criminal behavior. And it's a case of anyone who does speak out, anyone who's brave enough to stand up to these gang lords, are basically seen almost akin as traitors because the police are not trusted in many of these areas, because the police are seen as dirt. And it isn't just in the US, this does exist in the UK to some extent as well. Then anyone who speaks to the police is seen as a traitor, a snitch, a grass, as people would say in the UK. So there's that culture where criminality continues because it is tolerated. People won't go to the police because the police are the enemy. Um, and the byproduct of that is criminals continue with impunity, terrorizing society. And it's just a very sad situation. I lived in an inner city area for a while, and I wouldn't compare it to Philadelphia, but it was tough. I was assaulted on numerous occasions. We had our house attacked. Um, I don't want to make out like it was akin to certain American inner city areas, but it was bad and it was a very unpleasant and stressful time. Eventually, my family moved out. But the point is, these sort of inner city areas, there is a culture, and it's actually not that different if it's a black inner city area or a white inner city area, because in parts of the UK, there's parts of Northern England where a lot of the gangs are actually predominantly white. And it's the same story. They usually have low education. There's usually poverty is in the equation. I've always said I'm conservative when it comes to the issue of crime, and I've always taken issue with issues like poverty being used as a sort of excuse for crime. I don't think there are any excuses, but there is a common theme here, and it's basically a lack of responsibility. Because instead of taking any responsibility, it's always somebody else's fault. It's a fault of the government, it's a fault of the police, it's a fault of everyone else. There's very few people willing to take responsibility. And firstly, I believe there needs to be much more protection for people who do snitch. Um, that includes, by the way, police officers who are whistleblowers on police corruption. There needs to be transparency across the board. And I appreciate there's no easy answers to this. There isn't. None of these problems can be solved overnight. But this poisonous culture whereby criminality is tolerated needs to be challenged. And I will say this: I think rappers have a lot to answer for. Um, they may not be responsible for causing crime, and they will always say, "Oh, this is our art. We're just expressing ourselves." But when you get gangsters talking about beating hoes and shooting the place up and killing rivals and so on, they can say that's just lyrics. I don't agree with those who say that it's harmless. I don't agree with those who say it's insignificant. They say, "Oh, we're just the messengers." I don't accept that because, frankly, there is young black men in many parts of the United States who are influenced by this sort of culture. So when these multimillionaire rappers say that they've got no responsibility, that's bullshit. They do. And they say they're just the messengers there attacking government policies. But very few of them have done anything productive to actually change the lives of those in these areas. They've profited from it, with their record sales, but very few of them have actually done anything productive. I'm not saying all rappers, I'm not making a generalization here, but that's the truth. Most of them glorify criminality. And I defy anyone to say that isn't what they're doing, because it is. They're saying, if you behave this way, if you basically join a gang, if you have this sort of lifestyle, you're going to be a big man, you're going to be cool, you're going to be feared. And it's that sort of poisonous culture that starts a cycle. And yes, there's other factors. There's poverty, there's policy, there's all sorts of factors involved, family breakdown. But there has to be some responsibility as well. And I do think rappers need to be held to account. And no, I'm not saying it's just them. There also is policy areas, you know, um, where policies have got it wrong in terms of, and like I said, I'm not going to get into great details with this because I don't know all the information, but policy is a factor, but so is responsibility. And when Louis Theroux was interviewing these guys, their attitude was basically, we're victims, it's everyone else's fault. And it's insidious. And I get so frustrated when I hear people attack snitches or grasses. Someone who is prepared to do the right thing, say for example you have an innocent child who's killed in crossfire, and someone knows who done that, they go to the police. As far as I'm concerned, that person is a far braver person than the scumbags who are threatening them. And that's how I see gang members who behave this way. So there needs to be a culture in force, and I think politicians have a big role to play in this, of saying, no, these people are not snitches, they're not grasses, and no, this is not acceptable. This culture needs to change. And one reason I have no respect for Black Lives Matter is they have become a very vocal movement, and they started off as a movement to combat police brutality. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but they're a very influential group. They could be using that influence to also challenge this gang culture. From what I have seen, they have done nothing. That is shameful, and that is just really unfortunate, because they could be using their influence to try and change things for the better in these communities. They could be saying, we don't approve gang lifestyle. This is bullshit. If you're a young man, you're going to end up dead on the streets. So why the hell are they not doing that? I really see this as a big problem in the US, and to some extent in the UK as well, because we're not devoid of gang problems in our bigger cities, London, Birmingham, Manchester, and it's just poisonous. Crime is one of the biggest plagues on human development, as far as I'm concerned. It really is, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's not inevitable. It doesn't have to be that way. In terms of the future, we'll see what direction the future president takes. Of course, a president doesn't have to total power. They can't do everything, but they can maybe set the trend for the right direction. I do think guns is a major issue, and I know not everyone would agree with this, but gun advocates often say, "Oh, we'll look at Democrat-controlled cities like Chicago and Philadelphia and so on. They're gun-free zones and they have rampant violence." Well, that's true, but where do the gangs get their guns from? That's an important question. You have to look at the source, and I think in some of those cases they're getting their guns from states which have very soft gun laws. That seems common sense to me. So when we say this plaguing the streets of Philadelphia and Chicago, look at the source. Look at the source. Because these gangs don't just make the guns, they don't just come out of nowhere. And it's just an insidious, horrible situation. And the sad thing is, it does not need to be this way. So it's collective responsibility from everyone. But Black Lives Matter can start by saying to these gang lords, you are ruining the lives of our young people. You're causing a lot of this. They could be using their influence, and they've done jack shit, frankly. I'm sorry for the language, but it does frustrate me. They've done nothing. All they have done is said all white cops are racist, full stop, and that's it. Black Lives Matter has done nothing productive except stir up anger and division. They've done nothing productive. Now, if they went into these inner city areas and say, this is going to end, we've had enough of this shit, stop killing our sons and daughters. In fact, in the 70s, unless I'm mistaken, some of the early Black Panther movements, although I don't agree with the approach they took, to be fair, they did take a zero tolerance approach to crime, and maybe that's something that's needed. Maybe we do need strong black figures that can actually go into these inner city areas. And the reason, by the way, I'm focusing on the black community in this context, I'm not slandering all black people as criminals, certainly not. But this is disproportionate, and no one can escape that fact. And I just think that strong black role models could be doing a hell of a lot more. Come to think about it, I'm a boxing fan. Floyd Mayweather, he's a multimillionaire. What the hell has he done? Nothing. It's his money. He doesn't have to, but I think it's wasted. Someone in his position could really be using that for something good. And I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong about that. Maybe he has. Maybe he's opened community centres or whatever. I don't know, but I do think there are certain black celebrities who they've had their fortune, and then it's a case of, oh well, now we're just going to pander to the victimhood mentality instead of actually coming in and saying, wait a second, this lifestyle is wrong. These gangs are only going to leave you dead. And it's not simple because in many cases, frankly, young black men have no other choice, and that's utterly tragic. So I really think there needs to be more honesty here, and there needs to be less political correctness. Because all that does is get in the way. Sensitivity is not more important than lives. Um, and that's how I see it. Anyway, rant over.